Welcome Wargamers, my name is Doug with 2+ Stuff, and this is another Why Should You Play video. If you're new to the series or the channel, I do a lot of different kinds of content, from Star Collecting Box reviews to obviously a whole lot of lore overviews. But sometimes the real excitement within a faction is kind of a combination of all of those things, and so this video is meant to answer the question, why should I play Stormcast Eternals? Looking for a broader discussion about the faction as a whole, I want to divide this video up into 3 different points. The pillars of the Games Workshop hobby, if you will, and that's going to be lore, hobbying, and gameplay. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, if you don't like what you see in any of these sections, this is probably not the faction for you, but if you are intrigued, it might just be. So get comfortable, get your paintbrush ready. We're going to talk all about the Stormcast Eternals, starting with their lore. The Stormcast Eternals are the poster boys and girls of the setting. Gleaming in their often golden armor, they were created by Sigmar, god of Azir, during the Age of Chaos. See, after all the gates to his realm were sealed and chaos was overruling all the different realms besides his, Sigmar began creation of a new weapon that would one day allow him to take the fight back for the rest of the territory that was lost. That weapon was the Stormcast Eternals project. See, Sigmar spent the Age of Chaos choosing the greatest souls from across the mortal realms, the living and the dead, plucking them up in their darkest hour right before the forces of chaos destroyed them, and he pulled them up to Azir in an arc of lightning. Once this soul of a hero reached Azirheim, the home that they have for them up in Azir, their journey into immortality begins upon the Anvil of Apotheosis, where they are broken apart and reassembled over and over again, with the point of this process being to graft a small part of Sigmar's power himself, the essence of a god, onto each of their souls. They are imbued with the stuff of gods, making them physically strong. They're just, in terms of stature, they're quite large. They can endure just about anything. And because of that little bit of Sigmar grafted into them, when they die on the battlefield, which takes a lot, but it does happen, their form dissipates, and their soul arcs right back to Azir to be reforged again, making them soldiers who can die over and over and over again. Sigmar's plan was just to out-attrition the forces of chaos. Now, there are a few things that can disrupt this process. It does not go smoothly. Certain weapons or means of death can stop the souls from going back to Azir. And there's this fact that every time a Stormcast is reforged after death, they lose a little bit of themselves, and sometimes that makes a few of them quite crazy. But on the whole, these are the defenders of humanity, the demigod soldiers of a god king, looking to reclaim what was lost and defeat the forces of chaos. Now, there is so much lore to unpack for these guys. I have dedicated playlists for them in the description below. Between the various chambers of Stormcast that all fill different military roles, as far as like being frontline troops, scouts, wizard masters, those kinds of things, and the different storm hosts that represent different temperaments and focuses of battle, they have all the tools necessary to fight off the forces of chaos at home and abroad. And they're really designed to be whatever the mortals of the realms need. Again, warrior scouts, aerial assault, siege weapons, you name it, they can pull it out of their bag of tricks and make it happen. So let's move away from the lore because there's so stinking much of it. It's so easy to get into the weeds. And we're going to focus on this second big pillar that I want to talk about, and that is the hobby. Now, for the purposes of discussion here, when I say hobby, what I mean is the literal buying, collecting, building, and painting of miniatures for this faction. And to be perfectly honest with you, the Stormcast kind of have this one on lock for a multitude of reasons that make them a great beginner army for many people and a great kind of side faction to expand into if you are playing any of the forces of order. First thing, they are the easiest to get a hold of. Every single starter set that has come out from Games Workshop for Age of Sigmar features some variation of the Stormcast Eternals, from the original Khorne and Stormcast set to the second iteration of that, which was the Soul Wars, which is Stormcast and Nighthaunt, to the current set, which, the limited time one was named Dominion, but they have these box sets, and I'll throw them on the screen now, which is always going to be Stormcast and specifically the Cruel Boys of the Auric War Clans. Now, of course, Games Workshop does have other starter sets they put out that feature 2 different armies, but a lot of those are like buy it before it's gone kind of a thing. These are the products that stay on the shelves that Games Workshop really directs people towards. And because of that, they are the most accessible army for the average Joe to get into. So not only are they the poster boys, but they're in every actual, regularly restocked starter set. And because of that, when people leave the game or realize they don't like it, or maybe they want the other half of the set, you will find Stormcast Eternals on eBay for dirt cheap. Which is actually the second thing they have going for them in our little hobby, discussion, which is they are very accessible both in terms of literally finding models, but also affording them. Because so many people just have extra Stormcast sprues just laying around, it's very easy to find them online, do trades with them at a local game store, anything like that. As well as the fact that because of the way the faction functions, it tends to be a little bit more of an elite army. We'll talk about that more in the gameplay section. But because you need slightly fewer models, you're not going to have 90 some odd Stormcasts on the table at any given time. You only need between 40, maybe 50, depends on the kind of list you want to run, but on the average, you're going to be bringing a lot fewer units than your opponent, and so because of that, it only enhances the value. When you buy a cheaper Stormcast model on eBay, it point-wise counts more towards a list than, say, buying a clan rat. For new hobbyists, this is incredible because it means you don't need a ton of models to be able to actually start playing the game with a fully painted faction. You can buy a few things for cheap on eBay, paint them the way you like, kind of dial in your paint scheme, and then just start playing casual games right away. And so let's talk about that painting, right? That's kind of like the highlight of a lot of people's hobby joy, and certainly mine. When it comes to painting Stormcast, they are a fantastic starter army. When I say starter, I don't necessarily mean starter in the gameplay sense. What I mean is if you are someone who's new to miniature painting or you want to enhance your skills, Stormcast models are fantastic for a few reasons. One, the main, thing on them is their armor. Armor makes up the bulk of any given Stormcast model, barring, riding a mount or something like that. But a on-foot Stormcast soldier is mostly armor. So once you dial in, the color scheme that you want and how to achieve that quickly, you can crank out an entire Stormcast army very efficiently because they are predominantly that single color. It also gives you a chance to experiment with different kinds of blending or edge highlighting, things like that. They're just very simple to paint. All of the joints and the edges are very well articulated and detailed. So it's just a very easy faction to start painting. And then once you kind of, like I said, dial in what color scheme you want, you can take off running and you can just crank them out. And of course, you can paint them however you want, right? I mean, you can experiment with different Stormcast armors and stuff. One of the things I absolutely love about their battle tome at the moment, and this has been the case for all Stormcast battle tomes, you have the major, I believe it's 8 different storm hosts that you can play, but then there's 2 or 3 pages of just ideas. So if you're not a color theory guy like me, I'm not really great at coming up with color combinations on my own, I look at this for inspiration. You can make up your own storm host, you can take one of these pre-designed ones, do whatever you like. There's so much freedom, and you'd be surprised how different a Stormcast can look, model to model, even with the same schemes if you just move around where the colors are located. So maybe one is predominantly black armor with red trim, maybe one's red armor with black trim to signify he's a hero. There's a lot of little levers that you can pull, even though they all look predominantly the same color. Along with that is the fact that this is just such a massive range of models. You could, if you wanted to, really focus on just infantry troops and kind of machine gun through them very, very quickly once you get the knack for how to paint the armor color that you want and knock out the trim, do a quick wash, boom, you're good to go. But that's not to say that the Stormcast range is full of, very bland and simple to paint models. There are some incredible sculpts here, and once you start getting more comfortable with painting, I would definitely recommend learning on simpler ones like, Liberators is the classic example, probably the cheapest one you can find on eBay at the moment. But as you start to evolve your painting skills, you can look at some of the most incredible miniatures that Games Workshop has put out in years. Let me show you a few examples. You can paint up anything from like these stoic troops that just stand there and take a punch because they're like meant to be a shield wall. You have heroes that just look so epic and they're just so dynamic. Certainly some of the newer sculpts they have come out with really flex the muscle of what design can be done with all kinds of plastic sculpts. So they're really pushing the boundaries when it comes to the Stormcast stuff. And for the longest time, they didn't have anything really big, like a centerpiece model, but that has changed when you have stuff like the Celestant Prime, and then all these new dragon kits that were just dropped, including the Chariot, which I don't hear enough people talking about. It's a terrific model. My point is, there is a lot here, right? It's perfectly welcoming to new hobbyists and collectors. If you want to get in cheap, boom, there you go. If you want to get in learning how to paint, you will find that once you dial in your Stormcast armor color, the finer things allow you to really improve your painting overall. So you're going to be exposed to different textures. Fur on the Vanguard Raptors. You're going to have, what do I have to say here? Leather, weapons, different types of energy effects, that kind of stuff. It's all possible because the Stormcasts are such a broad range. There are few factions that are as inviting. Whenever there's a 2-player starter set, those two armies involved in that are always the most easy to jump on board with. So at the moment, it would be Stormcast and Cruel Boys because those models are in a lot of sets. People are buying the 2-player starter set and then selling off a half on eBay or something. But what I love about the Stormcast specifically is because they've been in every set, you will always be able to find older models to practice with, to really hone your skills, and then you can put as much work into them as you want, and you will be rewarded for all of it. Now I want to move into the third pillar of the hobby, which is gaming. Now, I want to make this very, very clear. I always do. I am not a tournament chaser kind of a guy. For me, what makes a good battle tome in terms of the gaming aspect is, does it represent on the table what's talked about in the lore? The lore makes 90% of this book up. So does that little bit of rules and stuff like that really allow you to tap into that storytelling? And for this, I would say absolutely. If you are, on a side note, looking for more of that competitive edge, I would highly recommend you check out my buddy's channel, Vince Ventrella. Him and his co-host Tom, or Tyler, depending on who's on that week, break down factions into complete detail, and they review how things work and synergize, and I really do appreciate them. So I'm going to put a link to their Stormcast coverage down below. Go check them out. But let's start with a general sense of how do the Stormcasts play, okay? And it's sort of a hard one. You're going to see me looking at my notes over here every once in a while. When you approach the Stormcast Eternals 3.0 Battle Tome, you immediately have to make a very important choice that's going to affect all list design afterwards. Do you want to be either a Scion of the Storm, meaning this is a Stormcast army that's being fired from Azir, and Sigmar brings them down in a bolt of lightning, and they arrive on the table 9 inches away from your opponents, and at the end of your movement phase. So that's one ability. The other one is to be part of a Stormkeep. This is to represent the Stormcast that over the years of Age of Sigmar's lore development have built entire fortresses and cities and all these cool things. They can take more Cities of Sigmar units along with them as kind of like an auxiliary force, as well as they get bonuses for playing to the objective, but they lose that ability to arc in from the sky. Now, I love this. Like I said, my main metric for measuring the goodness of a battle tome is how well does it play to the lore, and those really are the two defining narrative elements of Stormcast. At first, they were always just arcing in to invade, but now that they've conquered territory, they need to defend it, and that's where we get the Storm Hosts. But enough of that narrative gushing. We're going to talk about what ramifications that choice has, because the defining feature of Stormcast in terms of a con against them is mobility. The Scions of the Storm, which allows you to basically drop onto the table at any given turn, is fantastic because it allows you to keep some of your stronger pieces in reserve. You know, the enemy can't shoot them if they're not on the table, and allows you to be a lot more reactive. Meanwhile, Stormkeeps are awesome because they reward you for very intelligent tactical play with specifically objectives. So if they are near an objective, you have some special units called Redeemer units, which are like your Liberators and things like that. They can actually put mortal wounds out on enemies that are near objectives that they are trying to capture. And remember, arcing in from the sky is awesome, but claiming objectives is how you actually win the game, which is a thing that I forget like 1,000% of the time. Now, I have played as both of these things, the Scions of the Storm and the Stormkeeps. They're both fantastic, but they radically change the way you approach the army. If you choose Scions of the Storm, you can arrive anywhere on the table outside 9 inches of an enemy, and at the end of the movement phase, of course. And since Stormcast Eternals are generally slow, the average, dude with a weapon being 5-inch move, that ability to kind of put them where you need them is quite invaluable. It allows you to not spend a turn or two moving up the board. And like I said, the Stormkeeps are about objective play, but when you take that route, you need to really focus on the idea of, okay, I have a bunch of like very tanky, slow troops. How am I going to get them up the board? That becomes a consistent concern, more so than I would say for the Scions of the Storm army. The reason this matters is, for example, me personally, I play a Knights Excelsior army, and they focus a lot on Paladin units. That's the thing that they want to buff, it's the thing they love. Well, Paladin units only move 4 inches because they are slow as slow can be. So if I were to play them at a Stormkeep army, I really need to have a plan of how to get these super slow troops up the board. Otherwise, they're going to be utterly irrelevant the entire game. Whereas they'd be much stronger in a Scions of the Storm where they could plop in anywhere at any point in the game and then charge straight into the enemy. So it's little things like that. You just have to be aware of what you want out of your faction to do if you want to focus on objective play or mobility, with the Scions of the Storm allowing you to put troops wherever you need them. But then also, on top of that, there are some, access to like movement shenanigans and buffs throughout the entire faction. So for example, they have one of the best prayers in the game, which is translocation, I believe it's called. Basically, a priest prays, teleports a unit, boop, anywhere outside 9 inches. It gives anyone the Scions of the Storm ability. So if you're playing, say, Stormkeep, highly 10 out of 10 recommend taking that guy. If nothing else, it gives you some options. You also have stuff, of course, like the Vanguard units can teleport around the board. I believe the Hunters can be taken off the board and put up, anywhere near the edges. The Raptors, like the Palador Riders, they can just straight teleport, which is really, really cool. So again, there's options for both Scions of the Storm and Stormkeep, but mobility is going to be a key thing that you have to think about for both of them. That being said, Stormcast really are a jack of all trades, masters of none kind of an army. To me, at least in my opinion, their shooting has been lauded as amazing, and they do have some incredible tricks up the sleeves when it comes to shooting if you're looking at the highly competitive side of things. For me, rather than just leaning into one hard archetype, I look at it as an army as a whole. They have some cool spells, they have some cool prayers. Some are just duds that you'll never use. Same kind of thing with artifacts and that kind of stuff. The book has so many units in it that you're not going to use them all by any stretch whatsoever, unless you just have oogles of money to dump on all these things, or you can't take them all in one game. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, when you look at the Stormcast roster, decide how you want to play the game, and then I promise there's a pathway to do it. If you want to focus on magic, boom, we got the Sacrosanct Chamber, magic out the nose, we got Dragon Rider and magic, we got, it's all kinds of stuff. If you want to focus on more traditional, military ranks, you can absolutely do that. Hallowed Knights with Gardas and a whole bunch of Liberators is a mean question for your opponent to have to try and answer. Me, I like elite armies, so I'm going Knights Excelsior, leaning heavily into Paladins. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Because of that, I'm going to tend to be a Scions of the Storm army, keeping my Stormkeep stuff mostly for narrative play. So all of this goes into making Stormcast the most flexible, versatile, and welcoming army in the Games Workshop staple for Age of Sigmar. They can do anything, they're just not generally going to be the best at any one particular thing. But if you're someone like me who has a harebrained idea for a list and you just want to try it, you're not trying to go to like a US Open or anything like that, no tournaments. I just want to try doing a fun thing. I can do that and then completely try a different play style and use a bulk of the same models, or have the same army at least, so I can not devalue any part of my collection. So the fact that you can build a list to do whatever you want, whether it's telling a specific story or leaning into a certain game mechanic. It's all there, and I love that for it. Now I have one last set of pros and cons for the Stormcast Eternals in general, and that is the toolbox. When I say toolbox, I mean think of each unit as a tool. Each tool has a purpose. Your toolbox is so deep with the amount of units, specifically, I mean like heroes that you can choose from. It's a lot to take in for a new player. You have so many options for troops that do specific tasks, leaders that all the models that are heroes for Stormcast look awesome in their own way, but they all do a very specific job within the army. There's just a lot to take in. As a downside, I can see new players really like going cross-eyed looking at this list of stuff and be like, well, where do I even start? What's good? What should I do? All that kind of stuff where it's just a lot of information. And honestly, that's always been the bane of being the Games Workshop poster child, right? Space Marines have the exact same problem where their book is just so overflowing with units and options that it's just a bit much. When you consider the fact that just the hero section of the Stormcast Eternals Battle Tome is about the same length as the entire rules section, including units and abilities and all these kinds of things, as the Fire Slayer's Battle Tome, I feel, you can see what I mean. It's the hero section is an army unto itself. But the way to overcome that, con, as it were, is to just buy the models that appeal to you, play a few games, see what parts of the game you really click with, whether it's, casting spells, shooting, whether you just enjoy playing objectives and you just want to have a bunch of dudes on an objective, guarding it because you like the idea of like a shield wall defender, or if you're competitive, what works best against kind of your local league. All those kinds of things go into making your decision. I'm just saying, play a few games, see what clicks, and then once you kind of get some context for what each of the units can do, then you can start really leaning into some fun things. And because the toolbox that the Stormcasts have is so deep, you can address the same strategy in multiple ways. And so it's a very rewarding book once you kind of really dig in and explore it. Jack of all trades, masters of none. I like it quite a bit. There's a lot of ways to lean. They're always part of the story. Your collection will always be relevant in terms of narrative. When they release like campaign books and things like that, that'll have new optional rules for you. We're still talking about gaming, or optional missions and things like that. The Stormcasts are always going to be relevant, and they're always going to be, I guess, a major part of the balancing thing, because most people have at least some Stormcast Eternals. So, closing out this video, why should you play the Stormcast Eternals? Very, very simple. They have all the options, all the models, all the support, a kick-ass new battle tome, some wonderful rules that allow you to really recreate all of the events that have happened previously and currently within the Age of Sigmar universe, in terms of you can totally use these guys to recreate the initial blasts from Azir into the Realm of Fire, the first Age of Sigmar book ever. Those rules are there. So are the more recent ones when they're trying to defend great cities with the Storm Keeps. You have the tactical flexibility to do just about anything. Everyone's save and their unit abilities are generally pretty good. There's fewer than other factions synergies to worry about. It's a lot of mental decluttering. I just think they're fantastic. They're great for new players, both in terms of the hobby and gaming, because they're very straightforward. And then even with the narrative, it's great to have an army that's always going to be relevant. All these things go into making an exciting faction that is rewarding to play. It's great for new players. And because the toolbox is so deep, if you are an existing player in AOS and you play a different army, it's worth picking up a few of these just to have something different, other things to experiment with. And you will find, with a toolbox that deep, you can make a really fun list that no one sees coming. So anyway, friends, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed it, and you will stay tuned for the next Why Should I Play? Leave me your thoughts on Stormcast in the new Battle Tome in the comments down below. And if you could, go ahead and like this video. It helps the YouTube algorithm gods, and I really appreciate it. So thank you so much, and happy wargaming.